Hi there. Welcome to Mushroom Hour. Today on Mushroom Hour, we have the privilege of interviewing the distinguished Tugrul De Luce, Tug for short, and two gnomes for all you on Instagram. For the last 12 years of his life, he has ventured on an epic journey into the world of fungi. As a talented autodidact, his knowledge expanded quickly as his personal research took him from exploring an early curiosity in psychedelic mushrooms to becoming a veritable expert in identification of all manner of wild fungi. He has earned a deep respect in the world of mycology and is a moderator on pretty much every major Facebook group out there. Exploring what I would consider to be the frontiers of mushroom foraging and identification, he has even traveled into the wilds of North and South America with world-famous mycologists. And after having a chance to get to know him just a little bit, I have a feeling that this gnome's journey is far from over. Coming to us from Eastern Pennsylvania, the mushroom capital of the United States, Tugrul, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, you've been someone that I've followed through many Instagram accounts. You were one of the first people actually that I saw on Instagram that really inspired me to get out and start foraging. You had that blend of like humor, a lot of knowledge, plus you were finding really cool edible mushrooms, and just made it really approachable. And I know you've got a lot of knowledge locked up in your brain, but there's something about making it approachable that makes even someone who's new to it not feel intimidated and get involved. So I've always appreciated that.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. It's something that I kind of pride myself with, is that trying to make it communicatable for beginners, because it's really hard to relate often, because you're just kind of spitting scientific names at them, and it goes through one ear and out the other often. And when I talk to plant people, that's when I first realized it. They start spitting at me scientific names, and I got that cold glazed look in my eyes, and I'm like, oh, so that's the look I see in other people as soon as I say a scientific name. So the thing about it is, try to keep the descriptions of them as simple as possible, but still distinguished amongst the other mushrooms, so we can kind of get to the root of what's different between the different species.
Right. And I think that, for me, that's always been one of my goals too, is to make it approachable to people who know nothing about mushrooms to get involved. And I was inspired to do that probably in no small part by yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. I also try to put, the rare stuff that I see, the kind of obscure identifications that I find, because every place in the world is pretty diverse, and there's a lot of undescribed species out there, and I know that I come across undescribed species all the time, and it's interesting and fun to try to figure
now
this stuff out.
That is a super interesting world of undiscovered mushrooms or undiscovered fungi, because I tell people that, and when I'm part of forage groups, we all acknowledge that, hey, keep a lookout, not just for those edible mushrooms that you want, but keep a lookout for everything, because you never know what mushroom, shouldn't be growing in this area, or what mushroom may not have been identified. So it sounds like from your experience that, that isn't too far-fetched. People can actually go out in the woods foraging and find mushrooms that haven't been found here before or just haven't been identified.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really fun. Some of my friends are just really into foraging the good edibles, and sometimes I slow them down because I'm looking at the weird stuff, taking pictures, but they go ahead and pick the good stuff while I'm out in the back picking crusts off of logs, And
I think that is a big differentiator in the mushroom foraging community. There's people that are into all kinds of mushrooms, and then there's your edible or gourmet foragers. I think for myself, just because of my current level of experience, I kind of fall into that edible gourmet forager category. I want to go out. I want to feel the dopamine hit of finding something I can eat. That's kind of like my big incentive for doing it. But I know there are a lot of people who go out and really are keeping their eyes peeled for any mushroom that they find. And I think...
Now, don't get me wrong. I love foraging. I pick lots of edible mushrooms, and I like to diversify how many edible mushrooms we actually eat. I mean, there's so many out there that are so delicious, but people are scared to eat them. Um, there's a lot more approachable mushrooms that we can eat, and we shouldn't be so scared of them. Like even plants, when you taste a plant, you can actually get some poison by tasting it. When with mushrooms, you can actually taste toxic mushrooms and spit them out, which is really wild. To When I first heard it, I just didn't want to believe it because it just sounds so ridiculous. But it's true that the toxins have to be digested in mushrooms, and it's just not the case with plants. So that sort of
Wow.
fear, that sort of fear around the mushrooms is prevalent in most cultures around the world, especially like Anglo-centric countries. I think our country is mostly Anglo-centric, right? So there's a lot of fear all around the world for mushrooms, and it's really funny when you see how other cultures deal with mushrooms. They'll deal with amanitas often, and Americans, that's the first one that they tell you not to because it contains species that are deadly, but there's other species that aren't. So it's really fun to see actually like where's the mythology and the truth and logic line up here, because we have scientific means of determining if they're toxic or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things that because it's such a new field, there's just an explosion of interest probably in the last like 5 to 10 years where so many more people are getting into it. But it's the kind of thing that still isn't perfectly defined. Like when you think about so many things in the world right now, you can look it up on the internet, get definitive answers. Mushroom foraging, identification, edibility are one of those frontiers where you can look it up on the internet and get two wildly different answers. Which is another thing that I think makes it really interesting and intriguing. It's like one of those things in our world that isn't totally locked in and set, and there's not already a model. It's like there's room for discovery, and there's room.
Yeah, I mean, there's hundreds and thousands of edible mushrooms out there. I've definitely eaten maybe 200 species before. I've been doing this for 12 years, so like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was assuming I was eating hundreds of species by then.
Right.
And I counted it out, and there's 200 species is a lot. So I am probably close to 200 species or more of eating. I mean, if you put it in perspective, aren't there only like 400 and something birds out there? And we can easily identify thousands of mushrooms, right? So
when I think about the mushrooms that I eat, I'm probably limited to like. And you're not talking about like commercially grown, but like 7 or 8 species.
Everything in the wild.
Mushrooms. Yeah.
Everything in the wild.
Right. Well, we kind of jumped right into it, and that's perfect. But I am curious, how you developed into this foraging expert and mushroom identification expert, whether this was something kind of in your family or really how you got into this world, and then we could jump back into it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It was never really a family thing, but maybe it was. I mean, I was adopted, so it makes it really funny with that because, so I was adopted from Turkey, and there's probably a bunch of Turkish mushroom hunters in my family, and but that's, nobody in the United States I knew was hunting mushrooms, but I grew up right next to Kennett Square, where they grow all the mushrooms, or a lot of the world's mushrooms, mostly the Agaricus bisporus, the button mushroom, which is also the portobello, which is also the cremini. It's kind of the same mushroom, but advertised differently. But they grow interesting stuff like maitake, piopino, beech, whatever. Most of the stuff you see at the grocery store. But if you're lucky, you can find, porcini and chanterelles and truffles, and those all have to be hunted in the wild, and that's where I really like getting mushrooms, because a lot of these mushrooms can't be found in the store, not because you can't, you really can't grow them, you have to have a forest because they have the relationships with the trees, and no one's having a tree farm, just to grow mushrooms. So it's definitely just go out in the wild and pick them. And
So growing up in that area though, with so much mushroom influence, I'm sure it had some
Yeah,
effect.
we have a annual mushroom festival in Kennett Square, but it's really centered around the cultivated stuff, and they
Right.
don't really. Okay, so Kennett kind of came up with the thing, wild mushrooms can kill you, right? And that's
That
kind
was an
of like been
industry
very
thing.
pervasive in our lives since, and it's a really interesting campaign to get us scared enough just to buy their mushrooms, right? But it's interesting. They do grow a good number of mushrooms, probably like 20 species, maybe 15 species, 10 species. I don't know, but
But do you find a
they
difference between people that are kind of in that commercial mushroom industry and then people like you, people like myself, people like a lot of the big Instagram mushroom people?
these businesses have been around for maybe 100 years. I'm not quite sure how long exactly, but they're family run businesses, so a business is a business.
Right.
They're probably not really interested in wild stuff. They do import stuff. I mean, they definitely import truffles, chanterelles, porcini, which is interesting and great and all. But when you find out that you have 10 species of porcini in your backyard, makes it much more interested than the three that they're selling, you know, commercially.
Well, and that's
So,
what you just said kind of indicates, I think, your level of knowledge when it comes to mushroom identification. I think most people, including myself, when you think of porcini, you have one image of mind and you're like, there's 10 different species of porcini. I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't know how to identify that. So I guess
maybe
the,
around the world, what's on the market, who knows how many species, honestly? Because I mean, we get porcini from China, we get porcini from South Africa, we get porcini from all over the world, and they're all wild species, and they're all different species, and that's what makes it even more interesting. Some guy, I don't remember, you can look it up online. I really wish I had the thing off the top of my head, but
right.
they did DNA on some imported Chinese porcini, and they found 3 new species of porcini because it's just not described. Just like we're saying, many species are undescribed out there.
Now, when
So
did you said you've been doing this for 12 years. Obviously, it sounds like you're largely kind of self-taught, doing your own research.
right, I just kind of evaded your first question. Thank you. Um, yeah. So honestly, I was interested in psychedelic mushrooms because I had the curiosity at a young age, with that sort of thing, that sort of they're
Changing
just
your
very fascinating.
consciousness is a powerful, something that can literally change your experience of consciousness is a powerful incentive. And after talking to a lot of people, I know that's where the interest gets sparked
Right.
in fungi.
It's hard to admit it, just because of like the cultural thing. I mean, just being known as a mushroom guy, people ask, oh, is that gonna get you high? And you gotta laugh and everything else. But it's like, it's kind of it is very biased because you don't ask a farmer, oh, I'm a farmer, ha ha ha. Oh, do you grow a bunch of illegal plants? No. It's like, get out of here. I grow corn. So it's like, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, yeah.
but I got interested in farming because I heard about other things. I don't know.
Well, it's one of
So
the most potent mushrooms that we can eat. There is a lot of lore, a lot of accumulated history with those kind of mushrooms. So to me, it only makes sense that would be an entry point for people because it's like the most powerful effect on humans
right, I guess
potentially.
I should get into how I actually did it because it's a pretty interesting story. I had
Yeah.
only like $25 in my pocket, and I kind of had like bills to pay, and I definitely owed something, $25, and I walked in the bookstore, saw this cool mushroom book. It was just the regular Audubon book, which everybody buys, and it's actually pretty outdated, but it's 30 something years old, the book, and there have been better books written since, but it's probably most of our pe- people, our mycologist friends, everything else. Most of ours, first book we bought. um, and Gary Linkoff, he just passed away a few years ago. He was a really awesome guy. I had the pleasure to meet him several times, and he was always a pleasure. And he wrote that book, and we all have fond memories of him. He always was a great storyteller. You can probably find some really funny stories be told online or hear about funny stories from people in the myco community. But the Gary Linkoff book was really probably one of the most influential identification books written. It's definitely probably the most sold book in mushroom identification, even though it's So anyway, even though it's outdated. So I wanted to find psychedelic mushrooms, and I eventually found them in an ex-girlfriend's yard. It was covered in wood chips, right? And these things are growing like weeds in there. And I found what turned out to be psilocybin ovoidiocystidiata, psilocybe ovoidiocystidiata. And it was only discovered 4 years before I found it, so it was not going to be in any of the books that were available at the time. And in the books, it looked a lot like psilocybe cyanescens, which is a West Coast species that grows in wood chips that have wavy caps. They both get wavy caps and grow in wood chips. Different seasons, different types of wood, but overall very, very similar. Genetically, it's weird though. The ovoidiocystidiata is actually related to psilocybe cubensis, which everybody grows in their closet, and cyanescens, azarescens, allenii, subaeruginosa from Australia. Those are actually all closer related to each other.
So that was
kind of mind-blowing because they look so closely similar, and they don't look anything like the ones that people, you see on like Grateful Dead shows or whatever.
Right. So all of this universe though ended up being kind of your entry point to really what got you interested. Obviously, you were starting to identify some newer species, and I'm sure it kind of put you through your paces of identifying mushrooms, was figuring out which were the psychedelics that you could eat, that kind of thing.
Right. So most people get involved, and it takes them a few years, and they, a lot of mycologists have done it. So I want to find psychedelic ones, and they pick something random up, and they go, nope, that's not it. And then they start getting into it, and they go, oh wow, I can eat all these awesome ones, and then
Right.
I can eat all of these, and then like 5 years later, they finally find those psychedelic ones, and they're like, well, I've already been eating all these other ones. This is kind of cool, and it's kind of already passed. My first mushroom I really picked were those, and so it was really mind blowing that I was able to pick it out of the rest pretty immediately without fussing over a bunch of other mushrooms.
Right.
And it was mind blowing. I went through with it, and spore print looked right, and did it with my ex-girlfriend, and it was a really beautiful time. And after that, it really fascinated me, and I asked like whatever my higher power was, for that, and I found it, and I experienced what I wanted to experience, and it was really a special moment in my life, So I wanted to kind of give back. So I said, if I can identify that, I can probably identify a lot of other mushrooms, and just started doing it. And it took me a few years before I sold them to restaurants or anything like that, but but I had the confidence to find them until, nobody I knew was into this at all. It took me years before I, got into the myco community, really. So I just posted on Facebook, and a friend of mine from high school was like, hey, I'm a chef. You want to bring it to Philly, which is only about, an hour away from me, max, or most, Center City or whatever. And he bought some, and that's where it started for like foraging, and that was really fun.
It sounds like you got started just on your own, with an ID book, going after what you were interested in. That kind of spilled over into a realization like, oh, there are all these other mushrooms out there. If I can identify these, I can start identifying all these other ones in the woods. And then a couple years down the line, when you get that, I don't want to say, but when you get that response of someone who's like, hey, I want that gourmet mushroom, that really like doesn't validate it, but adds a different level of satisfaction, right? Where you're
absolutely
actually able to,
because I could have gone and knocked on the back doors of restaurants or something, but it wasn't really. It actually didn't even past my mind. I was just trying to give it away, and my friend was like, "Hey, you should come to my restaurant." I didn't even realize he was being a chef, you know. And then he told me to go to a few other restaurants that are back closer to me in my area because he's from the same area. I didn't really have to like go to the back doors and everything. It was just word of mouth of restaurants, you know. And that's really fun.
So you were finding enough gourmet mushrooms where you were actually able to supply restaurants. Now, was this kind of at the same time you were developing your skills at identification? You were interested in all these other mushrooms?
Yeah, I was kind of just interested in an idea of identifying all of it. And it only took a few years before I realized I can sell it to restaurants when a friend of mine bought them for me, basically. Yeah, it really validated that, you know, what I'm doing is actually pretty cool. I didn't really wasn't able to supply a lot or anything. It was very difficult to be a forager. I'm still kind of living like that. You know, simultaneously when I got into mushrooms, I was studying like sculpture and printmaking and stuff in college, and I was pretty successful doing art. And I was like, and I had a sculpting apprenticeship, and I did that for about 5 years, even through the first part of my mushroom learning curve. And I kind of left the whole art world to kind of like to sell to restaurants and things like that, but it's very difficult. And probably going to get back into doing art, honestly, because
I was going to ask if foraging was something that you felt like you could support yourself with, because I've known people who get into foraging, and they are at that level where you're able to identify gourmets, you're able to find a lot of them, bring them to restaurants, but it's highly seasonal. You're dependent on people not finding your spots first. You're up from like sun up, you know, until it gets dark out.
All it is highly seasonal. There's peak times you can do it, but you're kind of screwed in the wintertime, you know?
Absolutely. And then, yeah, you kind of have to make hay while you can, you know, while the mushroom season's going. You have to make your living for the year then. So it's, to me, it was like this romantic notion that I had when I got into mushroom foraging of like, I'm going to get really good at this. I'm going to start foraging and selling to restaurants. And I had some people actually doing it kind of disabuse me of that and be like, hey, just so you know, it's not a rosy path. You know, you got to really hit it while it's in mushroom season.
Right.
And even then,
and it's really difficult. Like even last year was very difficult with the season. It was not much grew. It comes with it, you know. My one friend, he's like wild out forager. He's really good at foraging and on Instagram, and he really studies this stuff, you know, like, yeah, he looks at like Google Maps and stuff and finds new spots and identify trees by the crowns of them if the pictures are taken at the right time of the year.
Wow. And that was wild. That was wild dot
forager. Yeah, he's been foraging for longer than me, but I got him into trying to get other mushrooms while you're at it, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I guess, so you were always interested then in both those wild forage gourmet, medicinal, but also like all the mushrooms you're finding around you.
Yeah. So the psychedelics were kind of old news to me pretty fast.
Yeah.
After finding them and it got into the gourmet stuff and that the gourmet mushrooms also bled into wild mushroom identification, where it's like more scientific. We're trying to get accurate information on what mushrooms we're looking at and undescribed species and stuff like that. So it's been a very romantic relationship, me and mycology, but I need to start making mycology art. I think making cool mushroom art would do really cool things.
I was going to say that if you have an interest in art, I feel like mushroom art, fungi related art is really something people are interested in right now. I love it. So I think that's a
pretty either change my whole Instagram to that or what, but
yeah, you got an easy path in front of you to get back into art. And just while we're talking about it, what are some of the things when people are out foraging? You know, I know there's basics.
Tree identification is 100% the best thing. Tree identification, oak, beech, hickory combinations are really nice. And then when you go into the autumn, the later autumn, we like going into conifers, eastern white pine, hemlock. Spruce and eastern white pine are pretty awesome in the autumn time for shaggy manes, delicious, lactarius, porcini, and maybe other boletes too. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and as I got more into foraging, I did realize that learning the trees was as much a part of successfully finding what you're looking for. And even once you've already found something, taking note of the trees that's growing around is a really big part of identification. What are some other points of identification?
The time of the year, maybe like 4 or 5 days after a good rain, and we're talking about like a nice soaking. More rain the better most of the time, but then there is a level flooding happens, and you don't want your mushrooms to be victim of flooding either, because that could make bacterial issues and stuff like that. So for the most part, more rain the better. 5 days after a rain, go to the right trees at the right time of the year. So there's different trees in the spring as the summer.
Right, so different seasons in terms of the mycorrhizal, like which tree you're looking for depending on the part of the year.
Yeah, you
like,
gotta know it. In our area, it would be like morels in the spring, generals and boletes in the summer, other obscure things, both in the summer and autumn. And then it's like maitake in the autumn, as well as porcini. If you're lucky, matsutake, but not really in Pennsylvania. You have to travel for that.
Yeah, maitake is one that I have family back east, and maitake is one that I've always wanted to do a trip like September, October, because I know that's when they're out around oak trees.
Yeah, we have these big historic oak trees. We have these giant historic oak trees that are hundreds of years old, and they're just ripe for popping out gigantic maitakes. David Aurora has one in one of his books. I think it was like 40 pounds. It's like, oh, Jesus.
Wow, 40 pounds of mushroom. Well, and maitake is just delicious. And as far as I know, on the West Coast, that's one that we don't get.
No, you don't really get it.
That season starts for us like July, kind of August. We get chicken of the woods, and then really it's kind of October.
Where are you out again?
So I'm in the North Bay area, just north of San Francisco. So, we start getting porcini around October, around the pine trees, October, and then into November, and then kind of December, and then after Christmas, it really drops off. You get the porcini and amanita around that time. Chanterelles are kind of weird. They can almost be year round out here as long as you get enough rain, and they're either around oaks, or sometimes you'll go to some of the coastal forests here and they'll be buried in pine needle duff. If you start lifting over the duff piles, even in like summertime, you'll find chanterelles under there. So yeah, wow. The seasonality's big. And then for people who do find a mushroom in the wild, just because I get this question a lot, and not necessarily, obviously everyone gets those questions of what mushroom is this, with like a picture of a dried up mushroom, but that no one could identify. But when someone finds a mushroom, what are some principles that they need to think about when they're identifying, like gills being not attached to the stem?
Beautiful question. Okay, so the underside, does it have pores? Does it have gills? Is it growing out of wood? Now, if it's highly decayed wood, like highly decayed, it can kind of resemble dirt. So it's growing out of the soil, or is it growing out of wood? And sometimes there's like an in-between stage. It's kind of good to note if it's highly decayed or not, the wood, because there would be exceptions.
Right.
Growing out of wood, growing out of the ground, having gills. When you get into the gilled mushrooms, then absolutely what you said, where the gills attach to the stem is absolutely important. Is it free, which means the gills are not touching the stem at all? Is it adnate, which is running up the gills? I think adnext is very similar. So notched, I'll just call it notched if it has like a little divot right around there. That's normally for tricholomas for the most part.
And that's a notch between the gills and the stem?
On that. Yeah, we're getting detailed on that.
Okay.
But yeah, it's normally just, is it free? Is it touching it at all? Right. Is it running down the stem? Is it just barely touching it? Spore print is pretty far down on the line once you get good at it. But for beginners, spore print's interesting. You pop the cap off the stem and you put it like gills or pores face down, maybe a piece of aluminum foil is easy to find. If you have like clear plastic or glass, that's interesting too. A lot of people tell you to do it on white or black paper. The problem is most mushrooms actually have white spore print, and then a good number of them have brown spore prints. It's just
Right.
nice to have them on a neutral thing like aluminum foil or clear plastic or glass. So you can actually put, if it's on the clear plastic or glass, you can put a different background around it.
Yeah.
Aluminum foil is just very neutral, being reflective and all.
You leave it upside
Yes.
down for a few hours.
Yep. And you can drop like a drop of water on top or something, or maybe put an upside down bowl on top of it so the wind doesn't really disturb it much.
Right.
You can do things like that. You can leave it overnight, maybe. The thing is that as soon as you pick it, you should do the spore print as fast as you can, because you're gonna get the best results then. And if you leave it too long and it has bugs in it, you might open it up and there's like just a pile of bugs. So we've all done it, I'm sure.
They can be quick. The bugs can be quick in turning a mushroom into just a pile of mush.
White spores doesn't necessarily mean it's like toxic or not, but it gives another feature to look at.
Yeah.
It's good to take a picture of a mushroom that has the top and the bottom and the side. And if you have one mushroom and you have a nice sharp knife or a razor blade or something, you can cut it right down the middle and you can prop it so one half shows the bottom and the other half kind of shows the top and the center and all the features. With one mushroom you can do that if you cut it and prop it right. And the camera, you leave it at the same kind of depth or level for the camera to zoom equally over both halves, and you should be able to get a decent identification from any mushroom from one picture, even without the spore print. Boletes, the spore print don't really matter, honestly. They're mostly going to be olive, brown, green. So spore prints on boletes don't really matter. You can get the microscopy done and stuff like that too. But it's better just to keep a dried mushroom, dry it if you want to save it for science or look at it under the microscope. Better than having a spore print. You can have both. The spore is going to have some details, but a dried mushroom is going to have spores on it as well. So that's why it's just important just to keep the mushroom and maybe put it in a dry container or something.
That's really interesting that spores too, the spore print is kind of further down the line. And that's what I wanted to know. I mean, personally for me, and I think a lot of people listening who are getting into foraging, it's like spore print is great, but like I know there are so many other factors that might be a little bit easier in terms of differentiation. And so I think what you just laid out, pores versus gills, soil versus out of wood, where the gills actually attached to the stem, are they free, are they attached? Some of those things are even a little easier to start with, and I think will really narrow down what mushroom someone's looking at. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I really appreciate that breakdown. And actually, you talking about the picture gets me into kind of the next thing I wanted to get into, because I know you're really active on Facebook groups and on social media. I'm sure you get floods of people sending you pictures and say, hey, what mushroom is this? So take notes, guys, if you want to send them a mushroom, top, bottom, sides. But I guess, how did you first interface with like the Facebook community? How did you start helping people identify online?
So the largest mushroom identification group is the Mushroom Identification Forum, and it was made by Tim Sage maybe 10 years ago or so. I'm not sure exactly, maybe 11 years ago, maybe 9 years ago, something like that. And it's now the largest, and maybe like, I'm going to guess 170,000 people. I was identifying on that for a few years before I even asked to become an admin or whatever. But I'd proven myself over the years that I can identify. You normally just put the ID in, but you really ask, like you say, maybe it's this or compare it to that. Don't ever just say it's this mushroom, because then you're being like, you're really sure. So when you're on Facebook, there's kind of Facebook etiquette in these things. You really want to have like all those features I just described, like the top, side, and bottom of the picture, hopefully in one picture. If you're unsure of an ID, just say maybe it's this or compare to this, because we're all unsure of IDs at some point. It's just better to ask what it is more than to tell us what it is. People are kind of ruthless on it. They'll make fun of you for thinking it's something it's not, because they have experience and you don't. So Facebook's kind of cruel in many ways, but it is what it is. Just ask and just say, I just got into this, I have no idea.
Right.
They should treat you well, hopefully, but don't get offended when people are jerks to you, because it's very common. And
I've talked to
community.
I've talked to people about that in the
they get
mushroom community. Yeah, it's the problem of the neophyte, which is like someone who's new to it. I'm really interested, like myself, when I've only been into this for about 3 or 4 years. So I would get really stoked and post mushrooms or say, maybe it's this. And, you know, you do get, I don't know what to call it other than kind of put in your place by people more experienced. But it is that dilemma of being new at something is like, I don't necessarily have the experience, you know, don't totally trash me. I'm just really excited about it. So it's kind of always a dance in like fitting in with being excited about something and not necessarily having the experience and still trying to like be part of the community, right? And I think the process sounds like you went through was really earning your stripes by showing up and saying, hey, and being good with your IDs and maybe putting things in there like, hey, maybe it's this or compare to this. And especially when you're newer out of the gate, don't be so clear cut or definitive, you know, in case it's not that. So the Mushroom Identification Forum, I know there are a lot of regional Facebook groups.
Yeah, so that was years ago, and there have been many identification forums that are similar, you know, have different names: mushroom identification, fungi identification, and there's regional ones. And the regional ones can be better for some things, but they can actually be worse for others because there's some people that are pretty rural and don't know what they're really saying, and some people that just know what they're talking about kind of can cover larger areas of the world. Some
Right.
mushrooms are more all over the world than others.
I'm always impressed by the amount of people like you or people combing those forums where I'll feel like I'll get a response right away. And that's why I refer people when they send me a picture. I'm like, hey, if you have Instagram, you probably also have a Facebook. I would post this on a Facebook group because you're way more likely to get help than just direct messaging someone on Instagram.
It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Dunning-Kruger effect. What's that?
It's kind of like when you first get into something and you think you're really good, but you're actually not. And here, let me type it in maybe.
That sounds like exactly what I was talking about.
It refers to the seemingly pervasive tendency of poor performers to overestimate their abilities relative to the other people, and to a lesser extent for higher performers to underestimate their abilities.
Yeah.
Once you get into it, you get humbled by people that are like way better than you.
Right.
But then at the same time, the better you get, you realize how little you know in the bigger scheme of it all.
Right. But when you're fresh starting out, like I was like, oh, I know what that mushroom is. And you start trying to identify. Yeah. Until you get humbled, until I met,
It's
that was for me meeting, more experienced mycologists who kind of had to guide me through the principles of identification. Now I'm at the point where I tell people, hey, I'm not even going to try to help with an identification if it's a guild mushroom, just because I finally realized how much I didn't know, that I was like, I'm very hesitant now to even try to identify something for someone.
Right. Once you get the confidence that you think you know what we were talking about, then all of a sudden you see something that's like deadly toxic and it like looks just like it, and you're just like, geez, I just might have made a mistake or something.
Right. Right.
Not really. It's not that extreme, honestly, but it can be, like, maybe. But it for some people, so it's just a funny effect of the human mind. I ran across that recently, and it's funny that you brought it up.
Well, and I've seen it with a lot of people, and I've seen it in myself. So it's nice to have a term for it, and understanding that this is a very real thing. It's a psychology. Now, the Facebook group, the online communities, I feel like those are great resources, great ways for people to get connected. I know a lot of people also get a lot out of, in-person communities or meeting in person with mycologists. And I do want to talk a little bit about your growth through mushroom foraging and identification to the point where you started taking trips outside of your local area and you started connecting with even more knowledgeable people. So there's no easy way to do it, because I'm sure there's like tons of stories in every trip and every connection. But what were some trips that really were kind of seminal moments for you in seeing like a whole new world of fungi or meeting someone who's super inspirational?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I guess there's two stories at once. I was really interested in wanting to find morels. It took me 4 years or 5 years before I found a single morel. They're that elusive in Pennsylvania that it took me 5 years before I found one. And I was kind of bummed about that. At the same time, about 8 years ago, about 8 years ago, my dad passed away, and I'd gotten a little bit of money from him or whatever. And he had said, it's better to travel when you're young. So at the same time, when I was looking for morel tours, I typed in morel tours like back then, and Larry Evans popped up, right? Larry Evans is a really cool myco guy. I'm sure you know of him. And he was on the front cover of that movie, Know Your Mushrooms, which is a funny movie about the Telluride Mushroom Festival. And he had morel tours, but he had also set up tours into Ecuador and Bolivia and other places like that. I'm like, oh my God. And he had this tour that was like, come eat chocolate in the rainforest, hang out with monkeys in Ecuador. And I was like, yeah, I like chocolate and monkeys and mushrooms.
That sounds good, yeah.
I was like, oh my God. So I brought a friend of mine and we both had a blast. Larry's a great guy. Stayed in the jungles of Ecuador. I was really fascinated by cordyceps at the time, and hopefully you guys will all get fascinated by it when you see the video with David Attenborough talking about the ant that's been infected by this fungus and crawls up a stem, and the fungus busts out his head and sprays spores onto other ants. And when the ants find another ant that's like super acting funny, they'll like take it off like way far away, and both the one that takes the one away or both die out far away from the colony. Yeah, so I was really fascinated with cordyceps because there's a lot of them, and they specialize in single species or maybe a few species of mostly insects, also arachnids. Yeah, so going to Ecuador and checking out the cordyceps in Ecuador is really amazing. Going to Amazon, having an awesome tour guide.
So was the tour, I'm guessing the tour to Ecuador then was more centered around different species of that, as you so eloquently put it, that zombie, that predatory fungus, cordyceps. Did you guys find exotic varieties of cordyceps? I think a lot of people listening may know about Cordyceps militaris or some of the cordyceps used in medicinal products that you can buy now. But looking up from a cursory inspection of cordyceps, you can see incredible variety of species.
Yeah, all right. So alien. You're bringing up a lot of really cool stuff. So historically, the Chinese have been getting cordyceps from a caterpillar in Nepal. And then the name is Yartagumba, and that's Cordyceps sinensis. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's probably Orchiocordyceps, or probably they change names on these things all the time on Mushroom World. But it was Cordyceps sinensis, and we have Cordyceps militaris. And a buddy of mine, William Padilla Brown, he grows the militaris and kind of made it a thing in the United States, which is really awesome. Which our local orange clubbed ones are really interesting. But the Chinese, right? The Chinese cordyceps are actually worth more than probably the most expensive natural commodity, maybe. It's more expensive than white truffles, and people think white truffles are the most expensive fungi out there. This Yartagumba stuff is maybe $20,000 a pound? Who knows? And it's always going up. People are out in the fields on their hands and knees picking this stuff, and it causes turmoil in their local communities, and it's because the Chinese have their influence, and it's also a driving force. I think it's 10% of the gross domestic product of Nepal, and that was 10 years ago. Who knows what it was now?
As demand has skyrocketed, that's probably gone up.
Yeah, so it's probably doing a big percentage of the gross domestic product in Nepal, which is really fascinating in itself. But so we went there, we saw them on stick bugs, we saw them on moths. I mean, right now there's a Acanthomyces, which is very similar, that grows on moths, which have like all these white projections growing out of the moth's body.
You're saying you can find those in North America or in Pennsylvania
right now. Yeah. I just went out with the Philadelphia Club, which is like a newly formed club, which is really cool. My friend Bethany Teagan, she started it last year, and she brought the group out, and we just found it a few days ago.
Wow. So you took this trip to Ecuador with Larry Evans, who I am familiar with, at least tangentially. I mean, I've met him in Mendocino. I met him at Telluride Mushroom Festival. I've always kind of joked around. He's like the Indiana Jones of mushrooms. When I saw his presentation on following around burns to find morels, which sounds like kind of how you came on him, was those morel trips. it's someone that you think, wow, I really want to go foraging with this guy. He's
Yeah,
got a
so you
cool
know what? So you
personality.
know what? Actually, like, Larry's like been a really awesome inspiration in my life. He soon after that trip, the next year, I went across the country, and he lives in Montana. So I went across the country a few years ago, road trip, and I stayed with him for about maybe a month, really,
Oh, wow.
maybe even like 6 weeks. I don't even know, but I stayed with him, and he took me out. We picked burn morels, which are morels that only grow in the wildfire burns like a year after the burn, out in like the Pacific Northwest, out in Montana and Idaho and things like that. You think of Idaho as potatoes, and it's like a lot of mountains in Idaho, and it's absolutely beautiful. Depends on what part you're in, I guess. Idaho and Montana, and going to California, and had a really great time meeting a lot of people across the country and meeting a lot of different mycologists, and also Alan Rockefeller. I met him on the same trip out in California, and I eventually went to Mexico with him around the peninsula, like kind of near Cancun, I guess you would say.
Like the Yucatan.
Uh, yeah, the Yucatan. Yeah, yep. And it was really amazing with Alan. He's a great influence in my life. Much my dedication.
Well, I mean, so it sounds like your identification of mushrooms, you taught yourself, you grew to a point where you were becoming kind of a force unto yourself in the world of mycology, helping people identify on Facebook, participating in kind of your local community. And I just think it's cool how doors got unlocked because of those skills to be able to meet new people and go on these adventures where you're able to find even more exotic fungi. And I always love hearing about that journey, and yours is definitely a really interesting one. And, you know, I took a trip I kind of had my first reaching out of my local area just this past September when I went to Oaxaca, Mexico, and I was able to go mushroom hunting, in an exotic place, not with a highly renowned mycologist like you did, but seeing other mushrooms and just being in that different environment. And I feel like I learned a ton in just working with the people there, and kind of broadens your perspective on the fungi universe. But what was interesting to me, it was a lot of the mushrooms. I assumed that obviously we weren't looking at cordyceps and some of the more exotic kind of alien looking fungi, but I assumed I was going to be walking into a world of just that, of completely exotic mushrooms that I knew nothing about. But instead I was presented with a lot of the similar species that we have here in North America. I guess it was only Mexico. It's not, across the world necessarily, but as much as you've talked about cordyceps, some of these other things, in your journeys, did you end up seeing a lot of mushrooms that you were kind of already familiar with, especially with your...
Dude, that is such an awesome question, honestly. So when I went to Mexico, that part of Mexico you would think is just got crazy different woods, like it's just like rainforest, like it is in Ecuador, but it's not. Here, let me backtrack. So a year after I went to Ecuador, I also went to Bolivia with Larry and Daniel Winkler as well. And so Bolivia was really interesting. And then, like I said, a few years after that, I went to Mexico with Alan. What's so interesting about that part of Mexico is they have 64, I believe, oak species. And at the same token, we only have 32 or so in Pennsylvania, or at least that's what I recognized at the time. So they have twice as many oak species in Mexico as in Pennsylvania, and as a lot of mushroom hunters know, oak is like one of the best trees overall for mushrooms.
I mean, it's a superstar in terms of mycorrhizal and all the different mushrooms that it pairs with. Yeah.
There's a whole book on it. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's a whole book about all the fungi that have relationships with oaks, and it's a really good book.
And you don't think of Mexico that's really interesting, because you don't think of like, oh, the Mexican oak, I don't.
Right, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's so amazing. And so I left Pennsylvania finding all these really interesting mushrooms, and then they kind of were dying off. It was kind of getting in that kind of weird time where it's in between seasons, in between summer and autumn. And I went to Mexico. It was like going back in time 3 weeks or something like that. But it was because of the elevation going up the mountain, as well as we went into the cloud forest where the clouds meet the mountain. So it's kind of like always mushroom heaven there, right?
Right.
And it was really, the most fascinating thing was that all the similar mushrooms we saw there, the things that were different, were interesting. One of the porcini species was really tiny and like cute and looked fantastic, but just tiny, like a miniature. And I thought that was really interesting. But for the most part, most of the species we see here, but we definitely saw some really interesting rare stuff that could exist up here, but doesn't often. Super rare stuff. And they're probably, a lot of them probably are genetically different, but a lot of them might be genetically identical to the stuff in North America. We might know after a lot of Alan's work.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know, Alan Rockefeller has done a lot of work on genetic identification using PCR and other methods. Not something I'm an expert on, but I was lucky enough to be part of the Bay Area Applied Mycology Lab out here in Oakland.
Awesome.
And yeah, I was a member for a little while, had a chance to meet Alan.
Alan did a lot with getting that DNA equipment in that lab.
Absolutely, in counterculture lab.
I went to counterculture labs with him once. I wish I had met up with you.
Oh, small world. Well, that was when I was living in that part of kind of the Bay Area. I'm a little further north now, and I don't get down there as much. But yeah, he was definitely a huge inspiration in just realizing, how much variability there is in the world and how much that goes into really identifying these different kinds of mushrooms that might look identical. He had this huge dried mushroom collection that he had collected from his travels. And for someone who was new to mycology, it was kind of mind-blowing. So that's super interesting. You were able to go with him and go to Mexico. The other thing I was going to say that I remember from that Oaxaca trip is, like you're saying, we did find a lot of mushrooms that are similar to things that we were finding here in North America, but it was so interesting to hear the different cultural perspective on them. So scaly vase chanterelle that we find here, considered, pretty much inedible or edible, but like forgettable, kind of bitter. They considered it a good edible there with proper preparation.
In Mexico, you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, in Mexico. And then
the same with the false chanterelle, which is also not really a chanterelle, just like the scaly chanterelle, the Hygrophropsis aurantiaca. That species group, there's actually a lot of species in there, but we just use really one name. That species they eat in Mexico, but I'm pretty sure it might get you like diarrhea or something.
I've always heard the false chanterelle makes you sick. So that's and another one that really stuck out to me from that trip was they pointed out. It wasn't an artist conch, but it was like a hard polypore. I couldn't really see it because it was so far up a tree. And our guide down there, Panchito, pointed it out and said, if you mix that, and I had to have the translator repeat it because I couldn't believe I had heard this. He's like, if you mix that hard polypore with snake's blood, it's really good started talking about it as like a medicine or a tonic. So I guess I love sharing the stories, but I guess my underlying takeaway is even in areas where there might be similar mushrooms, like some of the cultural differences that you get into in the mycology are mind blowing.
Yeah, you hear stories from David Aurora going to Japan, and in Japan they don't eat the porcini. They prefer the muscaria that's like boiled in a certain way and treated in a certain way. It's really funny. They didn't want the porcini, which you can eat raw.
Right.
Porcini is one of the very few mushrooms you can eat raw.
Right. That's a trip. So instead, they went after the Amanita muscaria, which they grow together. So I guess.
And the Amanita muscaria is the red with white dots Mario mushroom, if anyone doesn't know, and it's kind of inebriating. It's not really trippy if you were to take it. I've never experienced it personally, but from what I hear, it's like so lame that it's legal, it's still legal.
Exactly. I've heard the same thing. It's more of like a deliriant, doesn't really have the same kind of psychoactive effects. Now with all your experience, Tugrul, you've been to South America, you've been out to the western part of North America hunting exotic fungi, maybe even not so exotic fungi. So you've gotten a ton of experience in doing this. And I'm sure on Instagram and on social media, people are already asking you, hey, can you take me out foraging? So do you have a venue or a group there locally where you lead forages and take people out into the woods?
Yeah, so I started my local group, the Chester County Mycological Association, and I normally take people out on morel tours. I haven't taken people out more than the morel tours too much, honestly, through my group, but I'd like to do that more often, take them to the local parks and things like that. I encourage everyone to join their local mushroom club. I often, if I travel, I try to make an appearance at a local mycology thing and maybe present if they're welcoming to that or whatever. And so sometimes I travel around and do presentations all over the place because there are mycology clubs all over the place. You can just join your local one. That's where it's at, is about learning and sharing all this information.
Absolutely. And I think there are people like yourself that are like talented enough and driven enough to teach yourself about foraging, get out in the woods and learn from a book. Obviously, online communities are amazing, and just the scale of people that you're able to reach out to.
Pretty intimidating when you just get a book and go out into the woods. It took me about 4 or 5 years before I found somebody, until I met Larry, actually, all the way in Ecuador. That was actually another person that was even interested in mushrooms. I wish I had the resources we have today, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, and I think like even with all those resources, that personal connection where maybe it's not someone as much notoriety and knowledge as a Larry Evans, but with the local groups that are starting to pop up, and there's been a lot more. The Mycological Society of Marin County, where I live, just started about 3 years ago, and going in person to those groups, meeting people that have foraged in this area. It's always interesting when the club starts. At first, it has trouble getting members, but then eventually all the people that have already been mushroom hunting in that area for a long time, and in this area, we happen to have a big Eastern European community, Italian community that have lineages of hunting mushrooms. And so they start joining the clubs, and then you really start learning from people that have been doing this for so long in your area. And I always say it cuts out it puts you on a fast track to really learning how to forage, identify the relevant mushrooms in your area. So that's why I wondered if you had a physical community component. It sounds like you wanted to start your own.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to see people from all over the world come to these events, to these mushroom events.
Yeah, so that is an exciting future plan. I always ask everyone, like, what are you doing next? And I kind of had in my notes here for you, like, are you going to write a book about foraging? Are you going to start a mushroom farm? Are you going to start your own line of like Two Gnomes mushroom supplements with your picture on the front giving a thumbs up or something? I was wondering, because for people who may not know, who you are, you've been doing this for so long, and I know there's so many people now getting into it because mushrooms are like the new big thing. I'm like a symptom of this new wave of interest in mushrooms, and I always think it's interesting, I think it's right for people that have been doing this for a long time to become central figures in kind of guiding people as they get into this topic. And that's why I just wanted to know like what you're doing next. And with that, where's the best people to find you and find out more about what you're doing and follow along?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook, Tugrul De Luce, but kind of use Instagram a little bit more. Two Gnomes, TWO_GNOMES. So in the future, I'm going to be doing this thing with Larry Evans in Jamaica. He's started the Institute of Psychosomatic Mycology, and they are interested in doing a meeting in Jamaica in April. It's about PTSD and how mushrooms can help people survive traumatic experiences. And we're going to be doing our own, private thing in Jamaica where it's legal, where we're going to be sitting in with people to help them therapeutically. And I know that you've done interviews with people that have done similar things with Johns Hopkins University, and hopefully we'll get in contact with them and ask for advice since they have experience in that area.
Yeah, and I think there are some interesting blueprints. When talking with them, I know a lot of the clinical trials that are popping up more and more now are usually focused on like one issue or one set of symptoms, and sometimes the process they use can really vary depending on what they're trying to examine. But definitely, after the show, I do want to try to connect you with anyone I know who might be able to help with that kind of thing, because it is there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that that I'm sure you're feeling a little bit. There's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. But I think it's something that is going to be more and more prevalent. Obviously, decriminalized movements, like out here in Oakland, California, decriminalized psychoactive mushrooms among a number of other entheogenic plants. Santa Cruz just did the same out here. Denver, obviously. So I think we're going to see more and more places destigmatizing and decriminalizing these substances.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's going to mean that there is a need for more and more people, however daunting it might seem at first, there's going to be a need for more and more people to get familiar with these substances, holding space for these substances, and being able to translate to people how they should use them most efficaciously and most responsibly. So I think what you're doing with that project and what Larry's doing is important beyond just that event. It's important to get people prepared for the wave of new people, including people who don't know anything about mushrooms, who are going to get curious and get into this. We're going to need a wave of like modern day, and I hate the word shaman because everyone uses it, but modern day myco shamans.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to open the way for legal use of what the ancient people would call earth medicines, really. And there's other earth medicines other than just mushrooms.
There are a lot of components aside from just the physical substance itself that lends to it being a productive experience. And I think, whether it's psilocybin containing mushrooms or whether it's another substance, it just being cognizant of that fact that, it's the person that's there guiding you, the setting that you're in, the mindset that you're in, are all a huge part of that. And you don't want to kind of like take the substance out of that context, because then you're not really in the realm of being as like therapeutic or as healing or as productive. And I know I like to preface this with like, we're not trying to make, Tugrul into like the psychedelics poster child, but I think it is a huge topic, and I would feel more comfortable with someone like yourself who is knowledgeable about these substances to be kind of at the forefront of guiding experiences or implementing really what is a cultural shift. I would think it's people like you that should be at the forefront of that.
Thank you.
Because you are knowledgeable, and you have, I'm forgetting the name of the effect already, but you have the level of knowledge where you don't know enough. So you're on the whole going to err on the side of safety more than anything else, which I think is really important.
Right. Thank you.
So Instagram is 2 Gnomes. People can find you on Facebook as well. Is there any other promo?
Chester County Mycological Association. Yep. Chester County Mycological Association's on Facebook.
Well, we're going to link all this up in the show notes so people can go find you, especially guys, if you're in Tug's local area, get out there, become a part of his association. You've got, a huge resource right there in your backyard to help you go forage and identify mushrooms. Well, Tugrul, thank you so much for the time, walking through the questions. And for me, you're someone who's inspired me from the very start of my journry. So it was an honor to speak with you.
Yeah, you asked the right questions. It was an honor being part of your podcast. I really appreciate it all. Thank you so much.
Terrific. All right. Well, hey, we'll talk again soon.
Cool. See ya.